One of the great joys of my life has been occasions to be in wilderness. And maybe you have shared in that joy as well of being in a place of stillness, of natural beauty, of peacefulness and calm. And I was very surprised one time when I heard about a program that was designed to introduce people who had spent their entire lives in very busy, cacophonous urban environments to wilderness. And the thing that surprised me was that the leader said, one thing that often happens is that on the first night when we are out in the forest and there is quiet, maybe a sound of a distant hooting of an owl, but there's stillness, and up in the sky there's starlight, and maybe some of those who were a part of that trip had never seen the stars shine before because of urban brightness. And it is inevitable that some number of those who are in the group will not be able to sleep. And I said, well, is it because they're just so excited about being in this wonderful, beautiful place? And he said, no, they're not able to sleep because it's too quiet. Because there's no sounds of honking. There's no bright lights. There's no rattling of the subway train. There's no sirens going by. And the stillness is disturbing. And I think about that story because there is a modern day equivalent for many of us when we are not overstimulated. I was listening to a podcast this last week with a professor who studies attention span, particularly in the workplace, and all of the ways in which our attention is pulled in one way or another, in which it is fractured. And she was saying to the podcast host, she says, some companies have adopted periods of time in which email is not allowed. So you have a couple of hour block during the day, imagine this possibility if you've not experienced it, in which you don't have to check your email and nobody's allowed to send an email, so that the constant accumulation of messages that compels us to constantly keep checking, maybe somebody has sent me something, or because of some corporate policies, if you don't respond within a particular period of time, that's a mark against your job performance. But you can just focus on a particular project for that block of time and not worry about getting behind. And she said an interesting thing happens during those blocks of time. The people who are supposed to benefit from them start checking other things, because we are so conditioned to have that stimulus of interruption that when we don't have it externally, we create it for ourselves internally so that we can maintain the rhythm that we're accustomed to. That not having our attention distracted is as unsettling as the stillness of the wilderness when we're not used to it. So I was thinking about these things in reading the story of the gospel today and thinking about the particular day that Jesus had. So think about this from a stimulus perspective. Think about this from a perspective of using your energy in a day, the rhythm that you are accustomed to, what it would be like to get to the end of this day that Jesus had. He entered into someone's house as a guest, so he is in an unfamiliar environment. He is feeling the things that you and I would feel when we are going into someone else's house, being on our best behavior, being polite, being sociable, being friendly, accepting hospitality, all of the things that go along with that. But the host of the house was ill. And if that was you and me, we might go, oh, maybe this isn't a good time. Maybe I should come back at a different time. We might try to get out of the way. We might try to sidestep so as not to be a burden on this person. Jesus goes in the opposite direction. He says, let me help. Not let me help with the tasks of the meal. Let me help with the healing of this illness. He goes right to the core of the disruption. And he spends time with Simon's mother-in-law, with her in the fever, and this is among the healing stories that we are accustomed to hearing about Jesus. I have never healed someone of a fever, but I have been alongside of those who are ill. You have as well. You know that if you're really fully present and if you really care, that there is an amount that takes out of you. Not comparable to the person who's ill, but you really care. You're there. And you can't help because of that caring, of having some of that illness also take something out of you because you're there. To say nothing of what it might have taken to be the agent of healing. We heard story upon story of those in the medical profession, particularly during the pandemic, but it is not isolated to that time, of coming home at the end of their days and being completely exhausted and getting up at the next day and having to do it all over again. People leaving the profession because of the intensity of what it took out of them to be companions to those who were in grave health. So Jesus has that just one time on this one day. And then that evening at sundown, because apparently he was so good at it, and probably word got around, people were like, I want some of that too. So the gospel says they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. What must that have been like? I speak sometimes with my daughter, Natalie, about celebrity, particularly about internet celebrity and being an influencer, and I ask him, do you think you might like to do that? And she says, not a chance. No way. I don't want all of that attention. I don't want all of that pressure. I don't want to have to conform to other people's expectations. This is a 13-year-old who's pretty savvy about what that might be like. But Jesus has that attention. The whole city was gathered around the door, and he cared for them. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, cast out many demons. And so he gets to the end of that day. Now, compare that with a busy day of yours. What you feel like when you get to the end of that day, and what you've got energy for doing or what you don't have energy for doing. And imagine what that must have been like for Jesus. So I think about the ways in which we get accustomed to our energy being taken from us or being occupied by noise or light or digital distractions or what have you, and how that has conditioned us in our days. And that brings me to the core of this story and what happened next. And it tells us that early the next morning, when it was still very dark, he got up, went to a deserted place, and there he prayed. You know what you do when you are in a place in which you are feeling drained in order to restore yourself. I hope that you know what you do. If you don't know what you do, then that cycle just saps a little bit more and saps a little bit more, and that spirals sometimes into a really dark place. But Jesus, after this day in which so much was asked of him, and he was so willing to give, the next morning, before the sun even came up, he got up, and his intentional action was, I need to gear up for this day that is to come. He didn't call in to take a personal health day. He didn't say, oh, that was exhausting. I need a week of recovery. As a matter of fact, when his followers told him that everyone is searching for you, he said, all right, let's go. Let's do it again. Let us go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. More people are going to hear about it. More people are going to come. That's why I'm here. But the source of his energy came from his connection with God and his prayer life. So there's a story about a lady who had a very regular prayer life, that she was known, not because she was trying to impress other people with her piety, but at time to time when it would come up, she would share with people that she had a discipline of 1 hour of prayer every morning. And some people have a discipline of meditation at particular times during the day. Some people have a very regular discipline of physical activity, something that they know that keeps them in a good place for all the ways in which their energy will be used on a day-to-day basis. And the lady told somebody, she said, yeah, every once in a while, I know that I'm going to have a particularly hectic day, and it's just going to go from sun up to after sundown, and it really challenges that 1 hour of time that I try to set aside for prayer every day. So on those days, I pray for 2 hours. I need it. I have to have that place where I get my restoration and my connection with God for what it is that is going to be required of me. So after this passage, if you read on in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark and in the rest of Mark, you'll see Jesus goes on to do many more things that would have been highly demanding. Many things that were completely centered on him as the manifestation of God among humanity. And again and again and again, you will read that he is intentional about taking time, usually in a place that is set off, if not wilderness, then somewhat disconnected from the bustle and the crowds, in order to center and ground himself and gird up for what is to come. When we don't do that, we fall into the trap of what the professor talked about happening subconsciously. That is, we create routines that perpetuate what drains and exhausts us, because that becomes the norm in the absence of habits of piety that allow God to dwell within us and to flow through us. This season of Epiphany ends next Sunday, and we have been hearing one after the other of the series of ways in which God's presence has become known to people in Jesus' time. But the Gospels, as we are well aware, were never intended to be historical documents about past events that only stay relevant in the past. The season of Epiphany is reminders for us to make connections to our own time about ways in which we too can discover the living God in our own lives and in the world around us. So, whether or not you like going out into the wilderness and experiencing the peace and quiet of a natural place, whether that feels restorative to you or whether you get a little bit of the jitters because there's not enough stimulation, it becomes important for us to be aware of those external influences in our lives that both draw away from us the energy that we need and have to give, and those influences that restore in us in essentially life-giving ways the energy that God would give us and have flow through us. May we, through the stories and experiences of others, learn to look at our own lives and look at the places in which we are in need of restoration and go to God actively and willingly and gladly, prayerfully seeking God to lift us up, to restore us and to strengthen us so that we too can encounter relationships and opportunities with other people in the way that Jesus did, saying, let's go. Let's do it. There's blessing to be had and to be shared. Here I am, Lord. Use me. Amen.